Hi there, Rompereglas. Welcome to episode 22 of the podcast. And this is a unique episode. I usually have guests come on here, and I rarely do solo episodes, but this is a solo episode. And when I do a solo episode, I usually have notes nearby, pretty good notes, because I tend to ramble on and pause a lot and check in with my body. But I don't have notes today. And I just decided what I wanted to talk about just 20 minutes before sitting down to record. So I feel the vulnerability around that. And I just want to invite you to sit with me in my kitchen. I'm just kind of imagining us sitting together and drinking tea together and having a conversation about seeing ourselves clearly, seeing ourselves through a sovereign lens, and also bringing in pieces around collective trauma and how collective trauma really separates us at in a really foundational way, separates us from love, separates us from divinity, um, separates us from the truest version of ourselves. So I just want to back up and share how I came upon this realization and these 6 power blocks that I want to share with you. Um, I've been working as a therapist for many years and seeing a variety of different clients, from activists to um, faculty members at a prestigious college, and graduate students, and each would come in with a variety of issues. I didn't just work within a specific niche. I saw everyone. And what I noticed was that when we began to drill down into the source of the pain, into what was really like at the core, it all came down to these common themes. And I would just notice these common themes. And as I would notice them in other people, I would feel how they were resonating within my own body and how these were echoing in my own life. And over time, as I began to notice this more and more, at some point, and I don't even know like when it happened, I think it happened during this moment where I was just like, what the fuck, and just fuck it. I just thought, fuck it. What if I stopped believing all of these lies? Because these are clearly lies, because if I can recognize them as lies in other people, if I can look at a person and see the most divine version of their expression, and I can see that that what their brain is telling them and what these stories are in their bodies, if I can see that's a lie, then I have to see that it's also a lie in my body or in my mind. And so that's when I just decided one day, if you can believe that, I just decided to stop believing it. I just stopped believing the lies. And my life completely changed. It so accelerated everything in my life. It unblocked me. And in every way, like in my relationships, like in my intimate partnerships, in my entrepreneurship, in my capacity to create, to trust myself, the creative process, to allow the creative process to flow. That's it. To allow Eros to flow through me, to be connected to the divine, and to channel, to live in my intuition and to move with intuition. So, yeah. And I came upon this because I was so clear through all of the body work that I'd done in my 4-year certification in somatics. I was so clear that the stories I was entertaining were like the bullshit my brain was telling me was, I knew it was a lie, not only because of the reflection in my clients, but because I had done so much body work at that point, and I had had so much um, disconfirming evidence of these lies. So I was clear that these were clearly stories I was being told by my own brain, and by these traces or echoes of collective trauma. So let's talk about them. I call them livids. I sometimes refer to them as power blocks. But there really are, well, they are power blocks because they're blocks to love, and love is a superpower. So love is your superpower if you're listening to this. So the first one is lack, right? This idea that you're not enough or too much. And often this shows up as like both at the same time, which is like such a mind fuck, right? Because it really speaks to how you're never okay. And that line of where you are okay is like unattainable, always moving. That target is always moving. And yeah, so keep, this is the place where we keep like wanting to improve on ourselves and wanting to like perfect ourselves. This is like this wound of perfection where we need to like attain something. Oh, it's the next. Oh, I need to be better. No. You're okay right now, just how you are. You are just enough. You are just enough. And you may be a lot. You may be a lot. And that's really, really good. I am a lot. And I am too much for some people. And the people I am too much for are not my people. So I can leave them alone and let them do their thing. But I have to hold myself in my allotness. I have to honor my allotness. And that honoring is part of seeing yourself clearly. So I will come back to that, but I want to go through these 6 power blocks to love. So this not enough or too much is what we find ourselves in this perfection mode, this need to continue improving ourselves and bettering ourselves and like striving instead of just resting with a place of acceptance of where we are. And yeah, we get stuck in this story of not being to rest and be receptive and allow and accept ourselves, and just like this is good. This is just good, just the way that it is. So it's scarcity based, and yeah, it keeps us in that wound of striving, having to be better. So the second point is isolation. Second power block is isolation. This is the idea or the belief that you're alone in your experience. So it's like thinking about the individual over the collective, but also isolation from God, isolation from your divine self, separation from your inner divine. And yeah, what I want to say about that is that, just thinking about religious conditioning as sort of the strongest way that it comes through, right? All of these blocks of power come from, patriarchy or colonialism or white supremacy, all of these different lenses that we tend to see ourselves through. The capitalist lens, for example, the consumer lens. Yeah, I want to go back to the lack for a moment. This lack can show up like in the physical, right? Like, oh, I'm too big. or I'm not thin enough. But it can go into the emotional realm of like, my feelings are too much, or I'm too sensitive, or I'm not attuned enough, or I'm not enlightened enough, right? Or I'm not peaceful enough. Like, we can gaslight ourselves into all sorts of, um, just horrible feelings about ourselves when we are in that space. So, okay, just wanted to say that. Going back to isolation, this is going to be very disjointed because that's how I think, unless I have things written down. I'm not a linear thinker. Welcome to my brain. So the isolation piece, right? The separation from your inner divine. This is primarily how we're sort of taught out of our intuition. I remember just experiencing like God in nature in all of these little ways. And, you know, the adults around me and the environment around me was very like not acknowledging of that. And when that isn't validated and affirmed, we learn to not see it as normal. We sort of naturally separate from it because we are always looking for belonging in groups. We are collective beings. We're looking for belonging, we're looking for safety, and oftentimes we find that in groups. And so naturally we will drift into, our nervous systems want sameness. We don't want to stand out, and so we follow what the predominant mindset and worldview is. So, the separation from the inner divine and really separating ourselves from our truest nature also separates from intuition. So, and then we because we grow up in sort of this individualistic way of seeing the world, we think that, we see ourselves as very small. We see ourselves as like, God or the universe looking down on us versus the universe living inside of us, and the divinity or the divine existing in everyday life, existing in this cup of tea that I'm enjoying, or in this glance that is shared between two people. Like, the divine lives everywhere, and that God, or universe, or the divine is speaking through sensations in your body, through like intuitive hits, or just these intimate experiences in nature, for example. So moving on to victimhood. Victimhood is a huge power block, and I just want to acknowledge that a lot of us, most of us, all of us have experienced trauma in some way, whether it's you know developmental trauma, which is trauma with a little t, if you want to categorize it. I don't necessarily want to place those labels on it. Or big T trauma, which is, shock trauma, personal trauma. We all carry ancestral traumas because our ancestors, weren't able to do the healing work. And, through epigenetics, that just gets compounded with each generation. So victimhood comes from actual experiences of being victimized, of being hurt. So I want to acknowledge that that's there. Early experiences of being perhaps being disempowered as a group, if you're a person of color, or if you're part of a marginalized group, whether it's queer or being female. Children are often victimized or have power used over them just from authoritarian parenting. It can be as simple as that. And so that breeds a sense of powerlessness when we don't get to have our no, when we don't get to have our sovereignty as young beings. Then we do internalize a sense of victimhood, and that gets reinforced through systems of disempowerment, I don't like to call them systems of power anymore, because they don't empower. They are systems of disempowerment. They're all about um, inculcating, brainwashing, and yeah, telling you what is untrue, separating you from your truth. So this victimhood is where power is externalized. And I remember, like, this is a really personal one for me, because having grown up in a colonial environment, this is very, very in my cells, just this feeling of having grown up in a small place, feeling the hegemony of the United States like right in my backyard, almost like a looming shadow, and having lots of experiences. For example, seems so benign, but it's worth hearing. For example, when my father would buy something at the hardware store, 70% of the time it wouldn't work. 70% of the time it was non-functioning. It could have been anything, right? But 70 to 80% of the time it wouldn't work. And so what was internalized there, it could have been like that we got all the junk that didn't work from Home Depot or Ace or all the other companies. We would get it shipped to the island, and it would just end up in our hardware stores before the big box stores came to Puerto Rico. But what that sent, the message that sent to me, was that we were secondhand. We were secondhand citizens. And so that bred a sense of collective victimhood in me. That's just a small example of many, many, many examples of where it was just like sloppy seconds and feeling a sense of victimhood. Of obviously I have my own personal trauma that also dovetails with that collective story that for a long time had me in this place of powerlessness. And so something that I had to do intentionally was, whenever I felt that story running in my brain and even pinging in my body, I would have to like put my hand on my third chakra, like right at my gut, solar plexus, and just let myself know, like, I am not a victim. I am not a victim. I have choice. I have choice here. What is my choice right now? And so that's why decision making, deciding and choosing is so important, because we always have choice. So this is what I want to say to the part of you that feels like a victim, that feels like just swept up in circumstances. Yes, sometimes the universe throws shit at you, and you still have choice. You still have choice to move in alignment with your sovereignty. So going into the fourth power block is the imposter phenomenon. And I don't call it syndrome, because that puts the onus on the person experiencing it. But this is right. This is all of the ways that we are told that we're undeserving, that we're having to be, that we are needing to be more than what we are. For example, we are having to be a performance. We are having to meet the expectations of a false self. We are not okay just as we are. We are not okay in our inherent beingness. In fact, there is a sense that you need to steamroll parts of yourself, and that just being you is just like, it's not okay. It's not okay. So you're having to be more than what you are. It's about performance. Whew. And the how well you perform is not based on your needs, desires, and wants. It is based on the needs, desires, and wants of the eye of the beholder. And I'm going to go into the piece around the lens you're looking at yourself through, because this is about seeing yourself clearly. but I just want to name that, we are gaslit into this experience of the imposter. These are all ways that we are, in a sense, abused, hurt, indoctrinated into a false sense of self. So yeah, and what this breeds is a sense of wrongness. So these overlap a little bit, because this wrongness also taps into some shame. But this imposter syndrome is very much, for me, connected also to a colonial mentality where, and sort of a patriarchal piece around performance, around false self, around a mask of self, and that the mask doesn't allow for connection and vulnerability. So this is another place where you're having to, like, where relationship is not prioritized, performance over function over feeling is what I want to say. Function over feeling. What you do is more important than who you are at your core. And obviously this can happen through our upbringing as well as the collective trauma. Okay. So I'm wanting to move on to the 5th power block, which is doubt. I just wrote it up as doubt, but it actually is self-doubt. It's the way that we, it also connects to the gaslighter and how we, like, this is a disembodiment, in a sense, of, like, where we don't value ourselves, we don't recognize our gifts, we think they're not that good, when in fact they're so good, and they're exactly what the world needs, the medicine that the world needs. Or devaluing ourselves. Want to share that, like, in my family, my parents were generally good parents, and there were things that happened that weren't okay, but I I feel lucky. Having grown up with the parents I grew up with. And in my family there was this, like, this sense of, like, the criticism would come through, like, are you sure you want to do that? Or there was a questioning of my rhythm. There was a questioning of how I wanted to do things, because there was a way of doing things, and it certainly wasn't my way. And so what that did was that I was constantly questioning my experience. Or when we're like, oh, well, do you actually is that what you feel? Or you don't feel sad, right now. That's, we sort of, like, we steamroll again part of our experiences. And we, when young parts of ourselves, when important parts of our gifts are not celebrated, are not upheld, we don't see them. We don't appreciate them, because they were not appreciated. And those are the places that we doubt ourselves. We question ourselves. We just don't see ourselves clearly. And it most shows up in sort of a more harmful way in this: who do you think you are? Who do you think you are being powerful? Who do you think you are thinking that somebody wants that? Who do you think you are to say that or to share that? So this is how it comes up. So the last of the 6 power blocks is shame. And you've heard me talk about this before, and I have somebody that I want to interview about shame, have a whole episode about shame. But just to touch upon it briefly, the difference between guilt and shame: guilt is I did something bad, and it's, forgivable. But shame is that you are bad, that there is an inherent badness to you. And it is I talk about shame as like the places where we were unseen. And this all, again, ties back into seeing yourself clearly. So when parts of you are not appreciated, for example, when your softness, your gentleness, your loving nature is ignored in your family of origin, and it's certainly ignored in the greater society. We don't appreciate softness. We appreciate go-getter energy. We appreciate being a boss bitch. We appreciate extroversion, right? We appreciate narcissism. So we often shame the parts of us that are really soft and gentle and sensitive and deep feeling and receptive. And so just because they're not acknowledged, just because they're not appreciated and upheld by culture. So in the places where we're not seen or where you're not seen, it's like the cracks in the pavement where, like, if you don't, yeah, the cracks is where we're not seen. And in those cracks, like, grass will grow, weeds will grow. Yeah, it'll get overgrown with shame. So that's the best way that I can explain how that process develops, because we often think that there needs to be this huge experience around shame, that we need to be like, we need to have been beaten down in a sense to feel shame. But shame, shame arises in or originates in really benign ways. Like, I remember when I was doing when I was starting to do group work, which is something I so desire to do, it brought out a part of my personality, this really, like, possibly obnoxious, but really like this place where I really trusted myself, and I was just flowing, and I was like boisterous and energized and really powerful, really powerful. But it was a part of me that had been not appreciated, and it had been shamed. It was a part of me that was just like out there and energized. And as soon as I would, this is when I was hosting in-person groups, and I would all close down the office together. It was in the evenings. I would go back to my car, and as soon as I entered my car and would close the door, I would feel this wave, right? This like, oh shit, what the fuck just happened? Oh my God, you were like talking in there like this and this, and there was all this like judgment, right? All this judgment of what had just happened. And I would go into bed, and I would just want to just wrap myself up in the covers, feeling so ashamed of like what had just happened, the parts of myself I just brought out. But these were really beautiful parts of myself. Like, people actually responded well to it and were energized by it. And it all came from a place of deep caring and deep feeling. So, but those weren't appreciated. And so I had shame around those, and I had to like allow that shame to move through my system, and recognizing that as it was happening, like my mindset was like, this is the shame of my higher self qualities. These are part of my gifts. And I'm feeling the shame. And I was finding the truth in, or anchoring in the truth that these are higher self qualities, and allowing that the shame to wash through and to expel and to get released through my body. So that's it for the 6 power blocks. But, I just want to name that these are our deepest human fragmentation. I don't know anybody that doesn't experience this to some degree or another. And I still have, like, especially in my intimate partnerships, I have the too muchness come up quite a bit. And just like, I have to like sort of keep an eye on that and check in sometimes, like, no, that's actually not true. But this because it originates in collective trauma, these belief systems, these collective belief systems often stop us from truly stepping into our potential and our fullest expression, our stop us from holding our sovereignty, even when we have other choices available to us, right? It inserts confusion through judgment, self-criticism, self-scrutiny, this gaslighting, and even sort of the abusive ways that we talk to ourselves in our own minds. So what I want to offer here is that this collective brainwashing, these 6 power blocks, like, because it is universal, it can't be personal. And I'm not saying that these things don't live in your cells. They do sometimes, but like, let's at least get our minds in alignment. Let's at least get our minds in alignment about what is true and what isn't. Whenever you find yourself in a place of suffering, I want you to drill a little deeper. I want you to follow the thread of that suffering. Like, what is the story I'm telling myself? What is the story I'm telling myself? And is that story connected to one of these 6 power blocks? And when you do find what it's connected to, can you then move towards asking yourself, or ask yourself, that's not, or tell yourself, like, acknowledge that that's not true. It's a lie you're telling yourself. And what is it that is true in this moment? What is true if this story about me not being enough, or me being too much, or feeling like I am not good, or that I am undeserving or unworthy, if that's not true, what is true? The truth is that you're worthy just because you're fucking born, right? Like, is this person worthy? Is this other person worthy? Of course they are. Why are you an exception? You're not special in that way, right? We think of we are like, often the people I work with are narcissists in reverse. We think we're exceptionally bad or terrible, and we're always trying to like make up for that in some way. It's BS. So often these, colonialism is a lens that you see yourself through. You can see yourself through a capitalist lens, where you are like looking at your body, for example, as like consumable. Is my body consumable? Is it sexy enough? Is it this, or this is that? Recognize that you're seeing yourself through a patriarchal, capitalist, and possibly white supremacist lens, colonial lens, maybe all of the above, right? So we need to see our gifts clearly. We need to recognize that, yeah, what are your gifts? Is your gift love? Is your gift attentiveness? Is your value in how you transmit your message? What is your unique medicine? When we don't know what that is, and it usually, well, not usually, it all ties back to love. It all goes back to love. So seeing yourself clearly is about seeing yourself as love. And for me, that process is, whenever I find myself in a story, I ask myself, where's the truth? What's the alternative truth? If I can identify this as a lie, right? And I've identified it as a lie because it ties back into one of the power blocks, then what is true? Then what is actually true? And, I think about when I was talking to this, I was talking to someone about seeing yourself with a sovereign lens, right? And this is part of the questioning, the inquiry process of asking yourself what is actually true. It's recognizing what lens you're looking through. And I think of this as like when you go to the eye doctor and you are, they're switching out the lenses. That's how I visualize it for myself. And I often switch the lens, and I just, in my mind, I move it away from my eye. I decide that that's not the lens that I'm going to look at myself through. And so asking myself what is true is the sovereign lens. It is the lens of the divine, or the lens of the soul. right? Not looking at myself through this human fragmentation, but looking at myself through the greater universal energy, the greater universal truth. And, you know, when we don't see ourselves clearly, we often get into, we suffer. First of all, we suffer within our own brains and our own bodies. But what often also happens is that we don't bring our gifts out into the world. And there was something else. We don't do the things that we're spirit is asking us to do. We just don't bring ourselves out in the world. We hide. We hide. And my motivation is to not have you hide, is for you to really honor who you are. And we don't set boundaries. We don't set boundaries when we don't see ourselves clearly, because we don't know how to value what we give. You know, a lot of you, people I work with, myself included, we're really good listeners. We're really good at giving. We're givers. But we don't, when you're over giving, you're not valuing what you have to give. You're giving it away for free. And I want you to value it, value what you have, value your medicine so that you can guard it in the appropriate ways. Give it to the people that will appreciate it. Because otherwise you're re-injuring yourself. When you're giving it out to people who can't appreciate it, you are re-injuring yourself. You are replicating the wound of not being appreciated and not being seen. And it is our deepest desire to be seen and to be seen clearly. It is also fucking scary. We're afraid to be seen clearly, but we have to see ourselves first. The work always begins with you first. You have to see yourself clearly in order to allow other people to see you accurately. So this is my invitation. This is today's download. Please feel free to comment and to let me know how it all landed with you. Okay? See you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.